All right, today we are here with Lori Candela. Hi, Lori. How are you doing?
I'm well, Derek. How are you?
Good, good. So why don't I just give a quick introduction so people know who you are, and then we'll kind of get into why you're here.
Okay.
So we have today's guest is Lori Candela, from founder of Retiring on Purpose and a certified professional retirement coach. Lori helps business professionals transition from career success to a retirement filled with purpose, clarity, and intention. With decades of experience in learning and development, coaching, and career transitions, she begins both strategy and heart to helping people design their next chapter. Well, Lori, welcome.
Thank you. So good to be here.
Yeah. So, okay. So, what does that all mean? Let's get into it. Yeah.
So, as a retirement coach, I work with individuals who are either thinking about retirement or, have just retired. And the idea is to help them really take a look at the non-financial side of retirement. So I work with them to identify what purpose is, their new identity in this new phase of their life, really, and put together a plan of action. Just like you have a financial plan, we want to put together a non-financial plan so that it'll really help you to retire, as I say, retire with clarity and live with intention.
That's great because, yeah, I mean, I think as a financial planner, I spend a lot of time looking at numbers and we kind of feeling like, okay, like, and, we ask the occasional, like, what do you want your retirement to look like? And half the time people are like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think there's an overwhelming lack of clarity about what that looks like for them. And, so how do you kind of get the process started with people so they kind of go from, I have no idea what I want to do with my time.
Exactly. So that happens a lot. People just say, well, I'm so busy, trying to finish up with work and, I've got my financial plan in place, but now I want to, not think about it until I get there, right? And that's so hard for planning, about what you want to do with this next phase of your life is so important. So what I do is I help them really step back and take a look at identity. Who am I now that I don't have that title behind my name or that email address? And who do I want to be? How do I want to show up in this next phase of my life? So we do a lot of introspection, a lot of self-assessment work. We look at values. We look at strengths. What do you bring to the table that you want to use again, and what don't you want to use anymore? And really, how do you want to spend your time in retirement, and who do you want to spend it with? So we take a look at a lot of things, around values, around interests, around strengths, and put a plan together. I like to call it a retirement journey roadmap so that they can really have an idea of where they want to go and what they want to do in these next years.
Well, I think that's so important because I don't think you want to be the person or the retiree who just sits there and like, okay, now I'm looking at my TV all day and letting your brain rot, right? So it's... Especially for, I'm sure you probably work with more like higher performers and people like that are really,
Absolutely.
Hey, I've been grinding for 40 plus years, right? I've made a very high level profession, and I think there's a lot of meaning and value that, they take from that piece of it.
Absolutely.
So how do you get that same, like, I don't know what's called like a high, but like, how do you get that same like impact that you've been getting from work from their retired life?
And that's a great question because it is, you come down off of that. I've worked so hard. I've built that career. I've got this success. People know who I am. And it's like all of a sudden you retire and there's that big transition to who am I now? And what do I want to do? So it's like really stepping back and taking a look at what you want that to mean for yourself. So in doing the, a lot of the values work and looking at who I am and creating that identity really helps to create that next step, to create that plan.
Mm-hmm. Are there a lot of common themes you see with folks that say like, hey, I want to end up doing this? Is it typically like what they're doing is like charity work, or is it more like, hey, if it's more family related? Is it all over the place?
It's all over the place. And that's what's great about this next phase of life. It's that you can really design your life the way you want it to be. So for me, for example, people say to me, so are you retired? You're a retirement coach. Have you retired? And I had to step back and really think about that because it's like, I don't know. I've been doing what I did for so long.
Yeah.
And then I decided to shift gears and move to something else. So as I did that, I decided what kind of lifestyle do I want? What I was doing before wasn't going to be really conducive to that. And I created and crafted a lifestyle based on my values, my interests, who I am, what I want, and then I put together a plan so that I could move forward and really live intentionally and meaningfully in this next chapter of my life. And I do the same thing for my clients too. You know, when we look at our lives at this stage, you kind of look at what's behind you, and there are a lot of years there, right? But then when you stop and you look at what's ahead, there aren't that many. And I want to certainly make sure that I make use of that time and really live intentionally and live with purpose and joy.
Yeah, and I think I would say I would maybe push back a little bit because one of the things
Yeah.
I think that a lot of retirees are unaware of is actually how long retirement is. Because I know it's obviously shorter than your working years,
Right.
but many retirements can be 20, 25 years. So you want to make sure you have that time filled, and you want to make sure you're doing something purposeful with it and something that gives you joy and meaning. So I think like what you're saying is incredibly important, and how do you really make sure we're tackling that piece of it, right?
Yeah. And to your point, Derek, I know, and I'm sure you probably use this terminology too. My financial advisor says we've got the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go, right?
Yeah.
And typically that's to talk about, how we spend our money that we've saved during retirement. But when you think about the non-financial side too, it's like, okay, I've got my go-go years, and that means I want to do things, right? And I want to be able to do all those fun things that I've thought about doing, traveling, hiking that mountain, surfing, whatever it might be for you. And it's really being able to do that in that time frame and know that at some point we're going to slow down. My husband said to me the other day, our slow-go years are coming up. And I was like, oh, no, not for me, not yet. There's so much that we want to physically do that we can still do.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think also that if we're kind of mirroring the financial aspect of it, like the one challenge I have for a lot of retirees is like, okay, what are we doing with their time? And to me, that's like, okay, what's the cost of that?
Yes.
How are we building in the vacations? How are we building in the, hey, hiking up the mountains or maybe renting an RV and traveling the country, right? Because that's important as well, to mirror the financial piece of it with that. It's like, okay, what can I do? What am I financially able to do? And how does that impact me down the line?
Right.
So I think it's really important when you're looking at the financial piece of this and the planning for retirement is like, you have to have the other side of it too, because it's going to blend into the other thing as well.
Right. Exactly. And we talk about, when I work with clients, we talk about, thinking the whole holistic picture.
Yeah.
So it's like the spiritual piece of it, whatever that means to you. For some people, it's connecting with that higher purpose they call God or Buddha or, whatever, nature. And really figuring out where you are with that. And then looking at both the physical wellness and the mental wellness. Physical wellness, when we think about our habits, right? What do we do now that we want to take with us into retirement? And what are the health issues we want to be concerned about? And what healthy habits can we really start building? Because if we say, I don't have time to exercise right now because I'm so busy at work, I'll do it when I retire. Chances are likely if you can't do it now, you probably won't have that pattern when you retire. And then I look at mental wellness too, not in just terms of, mental health, but also cognitive health. And how are we keeping our minds sharp? And how are we dealing with the emotions that come along with this big life transition? And then we look at connection. Connection is so important in retirement because we leave that office environment, right? And you leave that day-to-day conversation, around the water cooler or the lunch room, and you want to really build those connections outside of work as well. You lose those perhaps professional connections. Can you stay connected in some way to the organizations you belong to, or is there something new you want to do? And then we do tap into finances a little bit. I'm not a financial advisor. I don't pretend to be one. But really looking at, do you have one? And what questions do you want to ask them to make sure that you are on track with where you want to be?
Yeah, that's great. And so let's say I'm like just about to retire. I'm 3 years out. Like, how do I know, okay, like I don't know what I'm going to do. And how do I kind of start that process of trying to figure out, okay, what's my next phase going to look like? Because I'm sure you probably get people that are a little before retired. I think you could probably get a person like a year or two into it, like, wow, I'm totally lost. I need your help.
Right, exactly. So now is a great time. If you're 2 to 3 years out, it's really thinking about the best place to start is what's my vision for retirement? What do I envision it looking like? Some people will say to me, well, I'm going to play golf every day, and I'm going to go fishing and I'm going to go traveling. Okay, what does that really look like when you think in terms of the day-to-day?
Yeah.
You can't travel every day. So what is it that you're going to be doing? Where do you envision yourself? Who are you with? What kinds of activities really bring you joy that you want to bring into that new structure of life? And really create that vision clearly. And then, working with someone like me, with a retirement coach that can really help you do that self-reflection, thinking about what you want to take with you, and really having that plan in place. Even if you decide, I was working with someone, she said, I'm taking a gap year. So even if you decide, I'm going to retire and do nothing, at least you have your plan in mind of what that looks like.
Right. Maybe you just need a mental break and say, look, I'm going to get a reset, and then go from there, right?
Right. And likely that year is too much time. It sounds good. It's like I can sleep late, I can do whatever I want. But usually after, a short period of time, people realize I miss that structure. I miss, having a purpose. I miss having goals.
Well, yeah, you think about every day's a Saturday. It's, usually not, you're waking up a little bit later and, you're not as in tune as in sharp as you normally are. Well, so what are like some common questions that you ask clients to help get some more clarity?
Great question. So, we often start with the vision and figuring out, what is it that you see yourself doing? Again, as I said before, who are you with? What do you consider to be your top values? And are you living aligned with those values? And then when we get into values, we do an exercise around, what are your top 3 values? And how do you want to move forward, demonstrating that you're living with them? So, for example, someone might say, well, one of my values is giving back, right?
Okay.
So if you're giving back, where do you want to give back? What's most important to you in terms of, who you're working with? Are you doing mentoring? Are you going to be volunteering in a community organization? Are you going to be volunteering in another capacity? And really being clear. I've worked with someone who retired and said, oh, I can't wait to retire and volunteer. And then she found herself volunteering for this thing and that thing and that thing. And then it just didn't match up with what her values were.
Yeah, she's probably busier than she was before, right?
Exactly. And not getting paid for it, right? Or some people go into the idea that, okay, well, I was an accountant my whole career, so I guess I'll just volunteer as an accountant. And then they find themselves, doing that same work again, but not getting paid for it. So it's like, if that's what you want to do, that's great. But let's make sure, let's step back and figure out, again, where do you want to spend your time? What's aligned with your values?
Yeah. I think that's just so incredibly important because it's, like you may have this skill set, but you may be thinking like, oh, I should be able to use that again. Or maybe the real thing is like, why don't I stretch myself in a different way?
Yeah, exactly. Some people use this time to say, I've always wanted to teach. Maybe I'll find an opportunity to do that. Or, I wanted to own a franchise. Maybe I'll buy a franchise and start something different.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you're kind of really mentioning that I think it's more important for people watching to really understand is like you're getting specific. Often I hear like, oh yeah, I'd love to volunteer. To your point, like what does that look like? Or I love to travel. Okay, well, how often? Where are you traveling?
Exactly.
Who are you bringing with you? Like all those things are really important. Like, are you going to be the person that says, hey, we're renting a big house and our whole family's going to get there every year?
Right.
Because I think it's more important than saying I'm traveling, because that to me is a very different story.
Exactly. And if you're saying, well, I want to travel, where do you want to travel to? And then, I always say, and you may have heard that quote, if it's just a dream, or a dream without a plan is just a wish.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's have a plan. If your dream is to go to Italy, what's the plan to get there? Otherwise, if we don't start thinking about the questions, like you just mentioned, it just is a wish, and someday I'll get there, and someday may never come.
Yeah, right. That's true. I mean, that's the having intentionality with it, I think, is really important.
Absolutely.
Right? So what are some typical resources you have out there available, and how do we get a little bit more hold of you? And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. On my website, I have some free resources, some guides that are helpful. People will often look at, and it talks about the dark side of retirement. And when I say that, I often get the,
is it haunted? Is that what the problem is? Yeah.
Is it haunted, or what do you mean by dark? And the reality is that, when we make this major life transition, it sounds good, and there may be a big party and, balloons and rah-rah. But then when you go from the old to the new without knowing what the new is, there's kind of that messy middle in between. So it talks about that, and it talks about the feelings of grief and really sorrow leaving this whole career behind and then not knowing what we're going into. So that's one guide that helps a little bit, talking about some of the things that can happen, like depression and addiction, and just being
Yeah.
aware of some of those things. And then I have a couple others on there too that are helpful. And what I'd encourage people to do is take a look at the retirement readiness quiz that I have. Ask some questions. People say, I'm ready to retire, but are you really ready to retire? Have you thought about some of these things? And of course, they can set up a time to talk with me, a complimentary session
Yeah.
too.
Okay. And what about couples? Because I know like we're talking individually, right? So I may be ready, maybe my spouse isn't ready, or vice versa, or there may be a big age gap. So how do you kind of navigate that aspect of it, the spousal relationship?
Yeah, there is a lot of concern around that. It's like, well, if I'm going to retire and my spouse isn't, what's my life going to look like, or what's vice versa, what's theirs going to look like? So it's really trying to make that decision together. And then there's this whole other thing. We talk about. I said I'd marry you forever, but not for lunch. It's like all of a sudden, 24 hours a day, you're together. If you both retire at the same time, and what does that look like? What does the space look like? And you're in my space, I'm in your space, and even being able to say, hey, we don't have to do everything together, even though it sounds like a good idea because we're both retired. What are you going to do? What are your activities going to be? What are mine? So I work with couples in the sense of really trying to distinguish that, determine that, setting boundaries, finding what works for the two of them.
Yeah. Do you ever run into challenges with it? Let's say, because you mentioned core values is an important part of it. Like I talk with my clients about core values. I think it's important. Sometimes they're not aligned, and that can be challenging. So how do you help them bridge that gap? Or you just say, hey, look, you guys are probably better off spending more time apart.
Well, it really depends on what they decide.
Yeah.
For someone, a value may be, I really want to travel, and I've heard this. I love to travel. My husband doesn't like to travel. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's come to an agreement of what that looks like. If you're going to travel, who are you going to travel with? What is he going to do when you're gone? What is something
pad,
he
right?
likes to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really trying to figure that out together.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that's a challenge because, I mean, no couple agrees on 100% on everything, right? So I think setting those proper boundaries can be really valuable, and really just honestly having the conversation. It's like, unfortunately, a lot of times you think married couples can communicate effectively, but I think you probably run into this, and I have. They probably don't. They probably need a third party to come out there and kind of pull out things out of them that they would feel uncomfortable telling each other.
Absolutely. And it's not, some people that say, well, what's a coach going to do? Is it like a therapist? And no, it's not. It's really helping you to communicate effectively and work together to come up with that plan that's going to be something that both of you are comfortable and happy with.
Yeah, because I mean, you guys are going to be spending a lot of time together, right?
Maybe.
And it's a very different scenario than, hey, you may be super busy because you had kids and you had a few years after that. So that's always a different dynamic. And you guys ever talk about any legacy things, like leaving a legacy, or how to involve kids, or any of that part of your process?
Yeah, it's interesting you ask. This is my theme for the month with my blog posts because, legacy is so important. And first thing we think of is just what you asked, right? The finances. And, sometimes people think of the big legacy in terms of, I want to build a school, or I want to, leave something huge.
Yeah.
And yes, that can be certainly something that to consider. But legacy is even more than those big things. It's in the little things. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want to create that people are going to remember you for? And that's what we go into and we talk about, really the specifics around, this is who I want to be remembered as, and this is why.
Well, I think that's so incredibly important. I think a lot of people just they kind of drift through it, right? And then they kind of get to the end, and then it's I've got to do this or this, and then usually it's the no-go years, right, when that's happening, and that's not a good spot to be in either. And do you ever involve the kids in these scenarios with them at all, or is it more kind of like top-down? Hey, the parents are deciding this stuff, and then.
I haven't, but it hasn't come up yet. But certainly, if someone said, "Hey, can we bring our kids in to talk about all of this?" That might be a possibility, sure.
Gotcha. So do you have any kind of just quick tips or anything that you would recommend? Hey, at least start here. If you're totally lost, what would you do?
Yeah, I would definitely say, just give some thought to this topic and to this, conversation. Begin by thinking about what your vision is. And, maybe there's something that you can do now. If you're thinking about, I want to become a coach, for example,
Yeah.
now might be a great time to start your coach training, right? Or whatever it might be for you. You might want to get a teaching degree, and now's the time to start before you retire. So really just being thoughtful about what you want this next part of your life to look like.
Okay, great. So, Lori, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find you? What's the name of your website again?
It's retiringonpurpose.com.
Okay, great. Check her out.